The Hanged Man. The principle of creativity on the path of power. This points to a very subtle level of perception of our approach to the mysteries. We're all aware that accessing the mysteries comes to us through books published by publishers that want to make money. And so there is this inclination to present material which will be popular, and what is much more popular than facing your shadow and dealing with your stuff to get on with the real part of life that you need to be free spiritually. What's much more popular than that is being told something easily understood, easily assimilated. And I think that more than any other card in the tarot, the Hanged Man has suffered from this process of putting forward something that's easily understood and not quite as confronting as really it is. And part of, well, not more than part of my work is to just check out what I've been told, what I've read in books, what my teachers have told me, my guides have insisted upon, and so on. Just check it out and find out what just doesn't make sense to me, and discover whether or not there's anything going on underneath that. Like, if a teacher has not yet dealt with a certain aspect of their own neurotic tendencies, then they're not going to teach wisdom, they're going to teach dark stuff. They don't know they're doing it. And this is universal. I mean, you can't get away from it. But we do need to just examine it sometimes. And the Hanged Man, representing the principle of power. Wow, got to think about that one. And the principle of creativity. This is very helpful to look at the tarot through a different lens, and that's what we're doing, looking at the tarot through the lens of the Holy Trinity. In fact, looking at astrology through the lens of the Holy Trinity, that Uranus, Neptune and Pluto are really profound mysteries far beyond what we have so far understood collectively. And approaching the tarot by examining the cards from a different perspective brings out a different consciousness of what's going on here. And it is fitting, this approach. It does fit. It works. So what's the Hanged Man really about? First of all, it's not only metaphorical. There are cases within our myth or history where individuals, men, have been hanged. You have Jesus, you have Judas, you have Odin, for example. And the principle of Jesus and Judas, for example, that's an intertwined mythology. The fact that they both died in this hanged position. One's death was simply corporeal and then became reborn into ascension. The other's death was permanent, so Judas didn't get reborn and ascended. And they took place pretty much at the same time, so we cannot divorce them. We have to know that the mystery of the crucifixion and the mystery of the apparent betrayal of Judas are linked aspects in this mystery. And this is going to help us understand what the Hanged Man is all about. We go back further than this myth to Odin on the tree, the world tree, in the tradition associated with the Vikings and paganism of the olden days. Odin was a figure of equivalence to Christ in a way, and sacrificed himself, or I should say his self, in order to become non-self, so that knowledge would come to him. And we may well see meaning within the Jesus story of the same ilk, that Christ came to earth Now, we all come to Earth in order to act out some drama that's important for the soul. There's no other point in coming. Now, if we take that understanding and apply that to Christ, which is different from the normal teachings, then we have to say that Christ had a gain in incarnating. There was something for that being, some reason for him to come other than altruism. And I don't really believe in altruism. I think if you enjoy serving people, that joy is yours, and that's the gain. So Christ must have had some benefit in coming, and we can, I think, fairly reasonably infer that that was to do with moving to the next level of spiritual consciousness. So an almost totally enlightened being became enlightened, for example, pretty much what the Buddha did as well. If that's the case, and he was just about to pass on, and he knew that he was going to move forward soon, and he passed the sop to Judas, whoever shall receive the sop shall betray me. He was actually aware of the imminent betrayal, and we're calling it a betrayal. But if we see it differently, it was an instruction. Look, you're the man that has to take on this job. So Judas becomes the one who's closest in a certain way to Christ, because he's intimately connected with his death, we'll call it, and he's intimately connected with the image of crucifixion, because he hangs himself. And because Jesus was capable of dying or not dying according to his own will, and Judas took the same line, he decided to die according to his own will. The similarity there is just so striking that esotericists cannot ignore it. If you're following a path where synchronicity is a key to how close you are to absolute magic, then this is as close as it gets in our mythology. So, hanged man. Here we have examples of hanged man being the gate to a new level of consciousness, dealing entirely with non-self. We follow the previous cards. We follow fortitude, having tamed the animal nature without denying it. We follow the wheel of fortune, dealing with life's vicissitudes. Things change, you cope. And here's the hanged man, like, the world is dealt with. Time to leave. Now, before death, the way that we leave life, for most of us, of course, it would just be sleeping. When we sleep, we leave normal life. The consciousness of normal life is taken from us, and we perhaps become free to journey as the soul does. This is a healing act on a 24-hour basis. Other than this, retreat is perhaps the only legitimate way to escape the world. And we see that there are similarities here as well. Retreat moves us into the next dimension of consciousness. Retreat demands, really, if you do it properly, that we give up worldly things. We give up speaking. We give up eating. At least we don't eat very much. We give up communing with people. We give up, therefore, investing our ego in social contact. We give up much. We give up most of our worldly ambitions when we're on retreat. It's as close as you can get to the image of the hanged man. And it involves the diminishment of identification with the ego to the point where you can actually gain greater clarity. You can have awareness of the self as soul. Usually when we use the word I, we refer to the ego. And yet when you have gone through this transformative test, this examination, this gateway to the next dimension of spiritual consciousness, the word I then means something different. It means I, who am a soul acting through this personality, have this agenda in this situation. You change your perception. And this is the essence principle of the Hanged Man, the shift of perception that we go through, however it happens, but presumably at the moment of death, we go through a big shift of consciousness, change in how we perceive self. On retreat, we'll go through the same kind of thing. And this shift of perception then informs life, because we create for ourselves life scenarios out of our perception. Perception is not a passive thing, it's an active thing. It is a creative force. That's very, very little understood and not spoken about very much. We can raise our consciousness to a level above duality temporarily, so we can decide whether we're going to be angry or hurt in a situation, guilty or blameful, yang or yin, active or passive. In any situation we can rise above, and then when we come down we're going to take up one point of view. We can't live in the world of duality without committing to one or other of the two possibilities. But this third place of being above it all, that's spirituality. Well, now we can visit there. We can visit there from time to time, and we can stay there for a little while. We can't stay there for any great duration. Those people who can are extraordinarily rare. Madzubs, they're called in Sufism. Mystics would be a lower level of that, a madzub being an extreme example of a mystic. A mystic would be somebody who's pretty much divorced from worldliness. A recluse would be on its way to being a mystic. And so we move away from the world of lies. This title, World of Lies, is what Sufis call the world. And it's so informative. And you get to a certain state of spiritual realization when anything which is not absolutely true hurts. It just offends one's sensitivities to be in the presence of somebody who's telling lies of any kind, whether it's a salesman or a politician or somebody who's using glamour for manipulative purposes or whatever it might be. The existence of that lie is a painful experience to somebody who is quite advanced spiritually. Now the Hanged Man, in a sense, is ridding himself, we can say, of that, of lies. You don't tell lies to anyone when you're hanging upside down or on retreat. You know, on retreat you might have a guide, in which case you're talking to the guide and you're disclosing secrets to the guide that you haven't even acknowledged within your own consciousness, let alone spoken to anyone else about. You reveal the truth to your guide on retreat. And the Hanged Man represents that principle. There is one more example that I know of this being a real thing rather than a metaphor. Now let me think clearly here. My teacher's 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 teacher used to do 40-day retreats every year, suspended upside down in a well. He tied his ankle above him and maintained this posture for 40 days with no food, no water. Now obviously he was a fakir or a yogi. And this is a yogic practice. I also know a man who lives in Frome in Somerset who I think he does it every day. He stands on his head as a very profound yogic practice. And the health benefits are considerable. The benefits to consciousness are considerable. And so you have examples here of where very advanced spiritual beings suspend themselves upside down in order to heal and shift perception. Now, what does it mean for ordinary people like us? It's not possible, really, for most of us to be mystics, certainly not madzubs, but we can actually go on retreat sometimes. However, especially in certain countries, one in particular I'm thinking of, if you're going on a retreat, make sure it is a retreat, because they're calling things retreats, which aren't retreats. Weekend workshops, which you enjoy because you have great food and you hang out with lovely people and you go home feeling excited, that's not the same thing that I'm talking about. A retreat is kind of running away, isn't it, retreat? You run away from the enemy, and the enemy is lying, untruth, the world of lies, in this metaphor. We retreat from the world of lies, which kind of means you're not allowed to talk. Because as soon as we open our mouth and speak, we're saying something which isn't quite truth. Silence speaks the truth. So if you think of your weekend fun workshops as retreats, they're not. They might be spiritual experiences, they might be educational, they would certainly do something of a healing type for you, but I'm talking about retreat, where it's not enjoyable. You give up stuff that you love, and it's a constant process of overcoming temptation so that you don't eat more than the necessary, you don't talk, you don't do anything other than spiritual practice. For quite a considerable time, it takes stubborn, hard work and powerful willpower until it doesn't anymore, until you actually really don't want to eat quite as much anymore as you were eating, which was already nothing. I was given boiled vegetables and rice every meal for my retreats. There was no pleasure in it. It wasn't delicious. It was just necessary to keep the body doing things. I didn't want to eat it. And eventually I just stopped eating it. I eat all the time. I'm well overweight because I love my food. But on retreat, I just didn't want it. And I didn't think either. I just did my practices. And because there was no thinking going on, I understood the practices differently, perhaps more deeply. Now, this is the kind of thing that we can do on a daily basis. Daily meditation. It's very helpful for this. But the key thing is identifying the self as soul. That's the inversion principle. I am an ego with a soul, or I am a soul with an ego. They're both true, but you have to decide which one to identify with. And the Hanged Man shifts that. Identifying self as soul. I think one of my most profound retreats, I've done a lot of retreating, and one of the most profound ones, in one example, it was the time when I opened my third eye. That was quite an extraordinary experience. At the end of, I'm not sure if it's the same one, at the end of one of these retreats, it was necessary because I was retreating in a high-rise apartment, and I had to walk down the stairs very slowly as I left at the very end of it all. And the world became bigger and bigger and bigger as I went down, and there was another window, and I walked around the stairs, and there's another window, and every time the world got closer and closer, and it was just like, oh dear, I got to go out, and I had to open the door and go out into the world. And it was in London, and it was along a busy path, just as people were walking to work. And it was a mystery to me. I saw this as strange. And I turned away from the world, and I looked back looked towards the wall, and there was a door in the wall which was a red colour, and it had markings on it. And I just stared at this door for a long time as people were walking past me. God knows what they were thinking of me. I was just staring at this door. And what I noticed more than anything was red. I just noticed redness. Like, wow, isn't redness amazing? I'd never noticed it before. I'd heard of it, that red meant something and that it did something and so on, but I never saw it before. And I walked very slowly towards the train station, very short distance that took a very long time to walk. And I just noticed ducks swimming and people already anxious at 8:30 in the morning. And I just noticed everything that I hadn't seen before. And none of it was exceptional, but everything was magical. Everything was incredible. Now, the Hanged Man is the door we walk through in order to get to that degree of alertness and sensitivity of perception. We see what there is to see, but we see it differently. And in today's high-tech world, we constantly practice high-level magic without noticing that we're doing it. We can talk to somebody who's actually climbing Mount Everest now. I could pick up my phone and speak to somebody who's climbing at Mount Everest if I had a friend in that group of people. Or under the ocean. I could have a conversation with somebody under the ocean or in an aeroplane. And all of these things are possible, and we do them without even thinking of it. A war goes on in some distant country, and I'm looking at images of it within an hour of the beginning of the war. This is extraordinarily different from how it ever was, and it's become commonplace now because we cannot perceive. We have lost the capacity to perceive properly. I mentioned earlier that perception is creative. So if we're not perceiving properly, then we're just not creating properly. And creativity is essential. The creator is certainly creative. So when we're being creative, we're aligning with God. The Hanged Man is not willing to align with lies and the world of lies and bland, forgotten perceptions. Not willing. And we must be that way. We must withdraw from the world of lies. That may need to involve martyrdom and suffering. It may be. And that's the teachings that we've got from pessimists who've taught tarot cards over the years. They teach of it as suffering and so on. It doesn't have to be that way. It's not necessary. If you actually approach this with a different consciousness, it's not suffering at all, it's exaltation. But you need to break through. It might be that you have to go through a period of suffering when you don't want to give up your food. You don't want to give up your conversations. Yeah, that may be necessary if you're not very clear yet. But that passes relatively quickly. You have to bite the bullet and make yourself go through the difficult part. But then you get beyond that. It's not suffering anymore. It's freedom. Because we're not caught up. We're not crucified by the lies. The lies crucify us. All of these lies that we have to suffer, they nail us to the cross of matter. And it's torture. To free yourself from this torturous world of lies requires that you shift your perception. Knowing that in any moment, truth can find a way to express itself as light. It doesn't require us to be tortured on the cross. It requires us to find a graceful way of being. Now, it may well be that words just can't be found to tell the truth. In that case, silence is what is required. And silence can take many forms. Then you're looking at the glance, or you're listening to the music, or you're resonating with the rhythm of breath of the person. Silence takes many forms, and sometimes that's the only way to tell the truth, to speak in silence. And you can go very much more deeply into this process by even having nothing in your mind as you hold silence, which is the training of retreat. This is the teaching of the hanged man, having nothing in your mind. You see something, you don't notice whether it's bad or good, because you haven't got good and bad in your consciousness. You don't perceive good and bad, so you can't see it. You've trained your mind to avoid judgments about bad and good, which is a lie, actually. You've trained your mind not to engage with the world of lies, so you just don't see what other people see. You don't see it. You perceive light. You perceive goodness. You perceive faith and know that that's the case. And you live like that. You insist upon being that way to yourself for a while until that insistence is no longer necessary. It's just the obvious thing to do because it's the only place to be. Now we're talking about a major challenge here. This goes beyond the intense, passionate practice of spiritual practices. It goes beyond that to a way of living which does not depend upon anything, eventually. I mean, I can't do it. But the people can, the Madhubs can, the sannyasins in India, they can, I think. You have to learn how to live on next to nothing. Now, that requires yoga so that you don't need to eat for 40 days. That requires all manner of things that we just don't access in the West. But what we can do is whatever we can do. So you might want to fast now and again, 1 day a week, have something you don't normally eat, or give up something you normally do eat. Give up your beer, give up your television, give up something that you love in order to make sure you're not habituated to it. And it may take time before a new way of thinking, a new perception arises within you, because that's what you're after. Just giving it up resentfully, that's not it. You got to enjoy giving it up because of the clarity of mind that you get. And in this clear-mindedness, you have soul identification. And then you can see much more. You know that you're not alone, for example. You're a part of it all. You're an aspect of unity. And as such, you are both simultaneously absolutely nothing and absolutely everything simultaneously. That's the paradox that's released into your consciousness when you go through this one.